Hello, Varlets. Today I wanted to do something that I did not manage to do with both the RBTs and Hive Scum class when I had early access to it. And that is to take a moment to sit down, analyze, and theorycraft some of the regular talent nodes for the Skitarii. This video is going to explore some of the interesting blue nodes where I think there will be some cool or powerful interactions and combinations that we can assemble. To do this, I've also been leveraging Cooley's awesome guides to help verify or confirm how certain mechanics are working and if they work the way I expect them to. To be clear, this video isn't going to be talking about the Blitz, Keystone, or the combat abilities of the class. That will be a whole video of its own. I want the takeaway from this one to be, oh, that's interesting and cool. Maybe I can use that in my own builds when the class is finally released. So with that in mind, let's dive in. First, some interesting facts about the Skitarii talent tree. In total, there are 98 talent nodes you can pick from to assemble your build. 15 of those nodes have a toughness regeneration component to it, making the Skitarii quite resilient at recovering toughness in many ways. You are also able to freely move from one section of the talent wheel to another by going through the capacitance generation modifier nodes. While most of them are connected to decent nodes, one of them is essentially a tax. I'm looking at you, Sure Shot Cogitator Sync. This makes trying to connect the range section to the melee section via the capacitance generation node a little costly. Speaking of which, the talent wheel is broadly separated into 4 different sections. At the top, we have the electrocution branch, which has to do with the application of the electrocution status effect. To the right, we have the range enhancement branch, which provides many benefits when it comes to assembling range-centric builds. Right below that is the melee enhancement branch, which augments your melee gameplay in many ways. And lastly, to the left is the support and utility enhancement branch, which deals with providing buffs and defenses to yourself and your allies. Across all of these sections, I have analyzed every single node, reading through and clarifying my understanding of what they do. The more complex they are, the more interested I am in learning more. Here's what has piqued my interest. Ablative wards gain 90% corruption resistance. Every 20 seconds, take 1 corruption damage. This node stands out to me because it presents a very interesting trade-off. You essentially gain near immunity to corruption damage in exchange for taking 1 corruption damage periodically for the rest of the entire game. This raises some questions, but also offers some pretty absurd implications. If you had no other item which buffed up your health, you would burn through your entire base health of 100 HP in about 33 minutes. This also means you'll lose your only wound in about 16.5 minutes, putting you on a little bit of a timer to reach healing to reset it. I think the trade-off for getting 90% corruption resistance is actually really interesting because it means you don't have to be afraid of Tox Gas Bombers at all. I really hate Tox Gas Bombers. You can also negate a good chunk of the corruption damage from the Pox Bursters, which prevents you from dying instantly to its explosion. On top of that, you also don't have to worry about being eaten by a Beast of Nurgle and Chaos Spawns since their munching does corruption damage. That's the headline trade-off. Tank corruption sources that would otherwise wreck you for 1 HP every 20 seconds. But it actually gets more interesting. The crazy implication that I'm wondering is that if you have a Zealot with Beacon of Purity, which removes 1.5 corruption every second, you'd essentially start the game taking 1 point of corruption damage and then have it immediately cleared. Then, as long as you are sticking with the Zealot, you'd be able to maintain a 90% corruption resistance on top of not having your health corroded other than losing that 1 HP at the beginning. Every time it ticks, the Zealot removes it and your HP theoretically shouldn't get any lower. But here's the part I actually wanted to dig into. Could I stack corruption resistance perks on my Curios to make me practically immune to the corruption damage tick as well? Because if it works the way I have calculated, then it would reduce the tick damage down from 1 HP to 0.385 HP per 20 seconds. This is effectively 1 HP per minute. And this means you can last for about 86 minutes with your base HP alone while being at 94% resistance to external sources of corruption. Is this overkill? Very likely. But it's food for thought nonetheless. Next, we have the Resurgence Aura. It gives you a flat 25 toughness, and then you and your allies in Coherency regenerate 50% Coherency toughness regardless of enemy proximity. I have mentioned this aura is very interesting for me because it plays with Coherency toughness. I know that most people don't really care about the Coherency toughness mechanic because it's basically a mechanic from a bygone era of Darktide, but the thought of the aura actually making it useful could not escape my mind. For those of you who are not familiar with how Coherency toughness regeneration works, essentially, as long as you are near allies and haven't taken damage in a bit, you passively restore a flat amount of toughness per second. The more allies that are near, the stronger the regeneration. Here's a table to show you how effective it is. It was initially built as a mechanic to keep the team close and would punish people from going at it alone since you would be leaving behind your passive regen, which we didn't have many ways to do so back when Darktide was really new. But it had a mechanical weakness. Even if there were technically no enemies in melee combat with you, the fact that their corpses would still count as occupying a melee slot meant that coherency toughness remained switched off. This made it effectively worthless as a regeneration tool in close combat because even if you didn't get hit, the regeneration wouldn't kick in until well after you were out of combat. This aura solves that by completely skipping the check for enemies in melee range and allows you and your allies to regenerate coherency toughness at 50% the normal rate. In the base case where everyone is in coherency, you would normally regenerate 7.5 toughness per second. With this aura, even though you might be in close combat, it will continue to regenerate up to 3.75 toughness per second. For reference, this is what 3.75 toughness per second looks like. Here, my dog is counted as an ally, so I can regenerate toughness through coherency. Here's that same 3.75 toughness, but with 3 toughness regeneration speed curios. Not great, but not bad either. Imagine if you were in the middle of melee combat and you just got hit, but then your toughness immediately started regenerating while you were still fighting. Wouldn't this go a long way into increasing your survivability, especially if you also had to avoid taking ranged gunfire at the time? I think it's pretty solid and, if nothing else, interesting to see in action. Moving on, we have Auto Repair Doctrines. Replenish 3% toughness per second, increases by 0.5% per current charge. In theory, this would pair well with the Resurgence aura we just talked about for a potentially very solid toughness regeneration baseline for your Skitarius. On top of the flat 3.75 currency toughness you could regenerate, Auto Repair Doctrines can give you up to 6.2 toughness per second if you fully invest into toughness perks and curios. This would basically add up to about 10 toughness per second as long as your toughness wasn't already full and hasn't taken into account the bonus you would get from accumulating more charges. From these few nodes and some investments into our curios, we can already start to see that the Skitarii has potential to be extremely resilient against range damage. But here is where it gets fun. I'm going to stack 4 nodes together, and by the end of it, we're going to have a Skitarii pushing somewhere around 16 toughness per second just for ourselves. To do that, we're going to need a couple of extra supporting nodes. Superior Defense Engrams, where range kills grant stacks, and each stack replenishes 1% toughness per second up to a limit of 5 stacks. With a full toughness curio investment, we could regenerate up to 10.4 toughness per second just from this talent node alone. Combined with the always-on regeneration from Auto Repair Doctrines, this jumps up to 16.6 toughness per second. That's the number we are aiming for. If we then take this huge toughness regen per second and add in Power Overflow, where we share 25% of the excess toughness we recover to our allies, we would be emitting an aura that restores 4 toughness per second to everyone nearby at all times as long as you can maintain the buff and remain at full toughness. If you add the coherency toughness recovery from Resurgence into the mix, then you've got the bones of a range support and utility build that is mitigating chip damage very effectively for your team as well. Theoretically, this heals around 11 toughness per second to everyone who is taking toughness damage if they also invest into toughness regeneration speed. Combine this further with the Voltaic Restoration node and you have a mini voice of command like the Veteran, restoring a burst of toughness whenever you activate your ability. This entire collection of nodes works together very well in supporting builds, and even just taking a couple of them here and there and investing in the right perks on your curios can make you a very tanky boy. Okay, I hope I didn't nerd out too hard on you there and you've basically glazed over. But let's move on. Another node which got me thinking was the Augmented Power Cycle. Generate 1% capacitance each second. This on its own increases the rate of capacitance generation by 50%, meaning instead of needing to wait 50 seconds to get a charge, you only need to wait for 33 seconds. That is 17 seconds faster than before. Just taking this node alone massively ramps up your passive charge generation rate. Superior Tracking Litanies, minus 50% movement speed penalty while bracing or aiming down sights. Additionally, you gain minus 30% spread. The movement speed penalty reduction is nice, but what I'm interested in is the minus 30% spread, and how that interacts with Advanced Combat Doctrine, which also gives you a minus 90% spread as well. Does this mean I can achieve a laser-accurate pinpoint stream of shots? Imagine taking a brace autogun, and it just beams an enemy 30 meters away because it no longer has any spread. That would be very funny to see. Ammunition Restoration Pod is another one which I was thinking about a lot. Every 15 seconds, replenish 1% of your max ammo reserves. Some key things to note about this talent. First, it rounds down the ammo you regenerate. So if you have something with 60 ammo in reserves, you only replenish 0.6 ammo. This is then rounded down to 0 so that tick doesn't give you back any ammo. Instead, that 0.6 is then carried over into the next tick after 15 seconds, and you regenerate 1.2 ammo, which gets rounded down to 1 ammo, and then you get that back into your reserves. Secondly, that remaining 0.2 ammo is then carried over and applied to the calculation again, and the cycle repeats. This means that the next time this talent activates, it will be working with 0.6 plus 0.2 for 0.8 ammo, which is then rounded down to 0 and the number is carried over. What this math is telling us is that this talent, while it seems okay on paper, is actually not that good for ammo sustainability. Given how slow the regeneration rate actually is, I think this talent benefits hard-hitting single-shot weapons like the Phosphor Blast Pistol, the Galvanic Rifle, and the Revolver the most. Having an extra bullet here and there for these weapons can really help them out a lot more. On the other hand, I think regenerating something like 7 bullets every 15 seconds for the Brace Autogun, for example, probably isn't going to be the most impactful use of this talent point. To put it into perspective, in a 40-minute game, which is already very long, the maximum amount of ammo you'll be able to regenerate regardless of your weapon is 160% of your max ammo reserves. In other words, this is worth about one single ammo charge and one big and one small bag of ammo, over 40 minutes. It's not exactly going to shower you in ammo like the Hive Scum, but it is pulling ammo out from thin air. I think it's a pretty decent perk in melee-focused builds where your ranged weapon is only playing a supporting role, like to counter specials or to snipe problematic enemies. Next, we've got Assassination Protocols. Increase range damage versus Ogryns, Monstrosities, and Captains by plus 25%. This is actually the first time we are seeing Captains mentioned in a specific enemy type in a talent. Plus 25% damage is basically giving you an extra tier 4 perk for your ranged weapons against these enemies, but there is one thing to note. Because the damage is applied by enemy type, any enemy that has any of the tags will be dealt more damage. I bring this up specifically because the Ogryn Packmaster, the newest boss that is finally coming to our main missions, is considered both an Ogryn and a monster. That means this talent deals 50% more damage to this boss specifically. It's very niche, but also very nice to know. The last couple of nodes I want to show you are Redistribution Conduit, where you gain 10% damage versus Electrocuted and increases 5% damage per current charge, as well as Weakness Analysis Doctrine, plus 10% damage for 8 seconds when you hit an electrocuted, soul blaze, burning, bleeding, or toxin-affected enemy with either a melee or range attack. These two nodes work together very effectively when you are using arc weapons. The Arc Maul in particular stands to gain a huge damage boost from these two talents alone. If you invest into ability charges, you could reach plus 35% damage from Redistribution Conduit, and then get another 10% damage from the Weakness Analysis Doctrine, which is then combined with yet another 10% damage from the Arc Maul's Innate, which lets it deal more damage to electrocuted enemies too. That's a 55% damage boost with everything combined. What was seemingly an okay crowd control and horde clearing weapon can now dish out quite a bit of punishment on its own. And if you weren't using the Arc Maul, something like the Arc Rifle is still going to get a pretty sizable buff instead. This is something I would keep in mind when build crafting anything arc or electrocution related. So those were just some of the interesting talent nodes I was thinking about when looking through the talent tree. There's definitely a lot more interactions to explore once I start including the other parts like abilities, keystones, and weapons blessings. But once again, I'll be sharing my deep dive analysis on everything about the Skitarii once I get my hands on them when it releases. So if you would like to learn more about its weapons, abilities, talents, and builds, then consider subscribing and following along. What do you think of the Skitarii talent tree so far? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Varlets.